it could be that Israel did this instead of a ground invasion. This humiliation that Hezbollah has suffered might lead it to say, well, we will do a deal. We will find some face-saving way of stopping this confrontation.
First the pagers, then the walkie-talkies, and I think we'll come on to sort of the more widespread impact in a moment. But I just want to talk in Lebanon specifically. Sort of, what are the ordinary people feeling at the moment, and the shop workers who could find themselves next to the next explosion, and even people with things like baby monitors who suddenly aren't trusting them anymore.
So certainly there's a lot of shock in Lebanon. I mean, all the WhatsApp groups are discussing this constantly. There's a lot of nervousness. The streets are pretty deserted. No one wants to go outside in case of whatever happens next. As you saw from those amazing videos, these pages were very closely targeted on people carrying them. But of course, you don't want to be standing next to someone who's got a pager in their hand that's suddenly going to blow up. And so at a general level, there's a lot of nervousness. But of course, Lebanon is a very fractured and fragile society anyway. It's had these, it's had a half century of disaster after disaster, civil war, invasion, interfactional fighting. Even when there wasn't the civil war, invasions from Israel. Economic collapse in the last 5 years, which means that the power isn't working a lot of the time. A lot of beggars on the streets, a very hostile living environment. Your power goes off, your water doesn't work because the pump doesn't work to pump your water into your house, and suddenly you're stuffed. Suddenly your salary is devalued by 95% because of the collapse of the currency. All these things, and of course that extraordinary explosion at Beirut's port 4 years ago, has left people very much on edge the whole time. It's a very, and you can feel that socially, you can feel that on the streets, you can feel this, sort of sense of perpetual crisis. So that's one very important aspect of this, just the general sense of everything going wrong all the time. And a general sense of personal fear that anything could happen to you at any time, and you can't really predict it or get away from it. There's nothing you can do about it, other than avoid areas where Hezbollah are socially dominant, if you like, particularly in the Shia majority areas of Lebanon and Beirut. But then there's also the more political effect of that, which is attitudes to Hezbollah, attitudes to Israel, attitudes to Lebanon's factional political system, where you have these power sharing agreements between the different sects, which gives Hezbollah a permanent seat at the table, if you like. And at the moment, it's the most powerful political and military faction within Israel. And so what you're also seeing is, you've seen it since October the 7th, but this is only going to get stronger, this divide between those who see Hezbollah as a defender of Lebanon, that have people rallying around Hezbollah, even outside its natural base, which is the Shia community. You see anti-Israel, anti-Western Sunnis and Christians also, saying we now support Hezbollah, we gather around. And those who are viscerally hostile to Hezbollah and the control it has in the Lebanese state want Lebanon to be a normal state, that functioning, unified political nation state without this internal militia. And they will be even more saying, look, this shows that Hezbollah are a paper tiger, that they are incompetent, that they are risking everyone's lives by waging this perpetual war against Israel without really knowing what they're doing, without really knowing how to succeed. They can go into Syria and defeat a bunch of Islamist rebels, which they did in the Syrian war on the side of Bashar Assad. But can they actually ever bring us anything when it comes to Israel other than perpetual conflict and perpetual risk? So that's the political knock-on effect, I suspect.
I just want to delve a bit into what you said there about the support of Hezbollah by the people in Lebanon. I mean, I guess a bit like towards the back end of last year when October the 7th happened and people were suddenly trying to explore the relationship between the people of Gaza and Hamas. It's very easy to just say, if you're America or the UK or anyone in the West, well, Hezbollah is a terror organization. But it is much more delicate a sort of relationship that they have with the people, and maybe a much more legitimate one with the people of Lebanon, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to use words like legitimate. I mean, it's very hard to say what that means, really. You know, who or whatever has legitimacy as a political organization in a in a fractured society. Hezbollah are not a democratic organization. They're not, but they work within a quasi democracy that Lebanon is as part of strategic alliances between other factions in the Lebanese system. And it's just a combination of geopolitics, local politics, and their military strength, which gives them this position in Lebanon. Quite a lot of people who vote for parties, often, religious-based parties that are allied to Hezbollah, would ideally not have Hezbollah there. It's just they are part of a broader alliance of factions that come together for internal and external reasons, including they've been in alliance with the mainstream Christian party for the last decade or so, just under a decade, which enabled the last president, Michel Aoun, who, as according to the Lebanese constitution, the president has to be Christian, and in order to get him elected president, they had to do a deal. The Free Patriotic Movement, which is the biggest Christian party at the time, had to do a deal with Hezbollah to get him elected as president. So, yet most of your Free Patriotic Movement Christian members are respectable, businessmen, voters, teachers, what have you. Going on holiday to France or to working in Dubai or in Western countries. It's an outcome of coalition politics that you've got this alliance that effectively controls Hezbollah, controls Lebanon, that has Hezbollah in it for the past decade or so. I mean, that's enforced by arms as well. So it's a balancing act for everyone. Whether that makes them legitimate or not is it's just a very complex word to use. What it does give them is a stake in the political system, and that has consequences for them. It has consequences for Lebanon, and it has consequences, you're right, for the rest of the world. You can't just say Hezbollah is an ordinary terrorist group that its own state is trying to eradicate, because it's not. So to that extent, it's a state actor. And if you take on Hezbollah, you are also taking on the Lebanese state in that sense. But of course, it also creates an issue for Hezbollah and those factions that it's in alliance with to say, well, if Hezbollah does such and such, to what extent are we, as the organs of the Lebanese state, going to bear the blowback?
So having sort of said that, whether you are, awkward relationship with them, for them or against them, what we have seen over the last couple of days is that members of Hezbollah walk among the people very freely within Lebanon. And because of that, this hasn't felt solely like an attack on Hezbollah. Will Israel, assuming, we're sort of fairly sure that it's Israel that carried this out, so will they be able to defend that argument? Will they be able to say, well, I'm sorry, this is just war collateral, so to speak? Or does this add towards those that say Israel are carrying out war crimes and genocide?
Well, they certainly tried that. I mean, I was on the Times radio this morning with Jonathan Conricus, who was the chief spokesman international spokesman for the IDF until recently, and that was very much his argument about the two children who were killed. He said, "This is very unfortunate. We don't want to kill children, but Hezbollah are legitimate targets, and a ratio of 2,000 targeted Hezbollah members of what we in Britain and America and the EU regard as a terrorist organization, a terrorist military group, uh, injured and killed for 2 civilian children casualties. That's in the annals of war, that's not a bad ratio. I mean, if you compare it to other wars, obviously Lebanon sees things differently, and Hezbollah sees things differently, and a lot of people will say this is pretty indiscriminate if pages are blowing up in supermarkets. It is a little bit more complicated than that because Hezbollah do walk amongst ordinary people in Lebanon, but they also not entirely random. You won't see many Hezbollah members carrying their pages around on tourist resorts in the Christian majority north of Lebanon, for example. So they have their own supermarkets, they have their own hospitals. Hezbollah, they have their own areas in which they dominate. So it's not entirely random, but yes, I mean the point is well made. This was an attack which was targeted very closely at Hezbollah, very cleverly, as we all know, but clearly had the risk of collateral damage, as to use the favoured euphemism, in terms of family members of Hezbollah killed, and passers-by, other people standing in the queue at the shops, as you say. So it's in the annals of this conflict, civilians, as they would say in all conflicts, civilians are often the unintended casualties, but the inevitable casualties of these operations. Make of that what you will in terms of your assessment of the morality of attacks like this.
I've seen, social media and even just friends that you talk to about stories like this who have been sort of semi-mocking Israel for the, given the number of explosions we're talking about, the relative few fatalities in terms of members of Hezbollah that they've caused. But it struck me that maybe there's arguably more beneficial to Israel, an information gathering element to this. They now know that anyone that had a pager or a walkie-talkie that has exploded, they know they're a member of Hezbollah. And I'm assuming Israel have got spies all over the place in Lebanon as well that will have, almost literally been able to sort of write down, right, him, etc.
Well, there's certainly when someone compared it to elections where people have to stick their finger in ink to show that they voted. If you're wandering around with a bandage on your hand or a hole in your thigh where your page has gone off, you're pretty much identifiable. But I think there's a much more serious point here, actually, and I think your friends there are missing a trick there when you see how this is done. As someone said, and it's kind of obvious and it's a bit crude to say it, if you can have your balls blown off by a pager that Israel has given your organization, that is a very intimate psychological blow to you and to your comrades. I mean, and that's what we're talking about. Obviously not everyone had their balls blown off, but they had their hands blown off. This is a very intimate attack. It's a very intimate psychological attack. It's saying not because you're sitting in a house that we're going to bomb in Gaza, not because you're on the front line. We know we can get you where it hurts, and you will bear the scars of it, right? You will whatever it was, I think however many martyrs Hezbollah declared, 20 or 30 martyrs. That's great. If you're seeking martyrdom, you can have your big banner outside your house in your village declaring you're a martyr. It's a different thing to go around for the rest of your life with a missing hand because Hezbollah could get to you so closely and so intimately. I don't think you should underestimate the psychological effect of that kind of, I'd say intimacy is a word I've seen a couple of times in the last couple of days. This is an intimate attack on individuals, and that's, I think that has a psychological effect.
Now, on top of the explosions of these sort of personal devices, we've seen now Israel firing rockets onto sort of Hezbollah targets over the border. I think there's been 20 projectiles from Hezbollah into Israel, which Israel have said the air defense systems have mostly dealt with. That has been going on, I guess, really since October the 7th last year, hasn't it? But I just wonder whether this is the start of whatever is next. And in your mind, Hezbollah has insisted there will be repercussions. What do those look like, and how soon do they come?
Yeah, so this is the big question: is what is this part of? Is it a part of a bigger plan by Israel, and how will Hezbollah respond? Two very distinct questions. I'll take the second one first, the one you most directly answered. Um, so let's set this in a bit of context. A few weeks ago, Israel had another massive intelligence coup when it uh, um, managed to kill Fuad Shukr, who is the Hezbollah military commander. And you talked about spies. We don't know how they planned that operation, but they knew where he was. They hit the apartment, not only the apartment block, but the apartment that he was sitting in southern Beirut, which is a Hezbollah dominated area. There was again collateral damage. A Syrian family living in the same block lost several of its members, but that was they knew where he was when he was there, and they killed him. And that was likewise, Hezbollah said there will be repercussions, and so at the beginning of the month, there was a massive missile attack from Hezbollah into Israel, but Israel intercepted it. I mean, there's claim and counterclaim about exactly what happened, but what we do know is that the salvo of rockets that Hezbollah fired, for example, at Mossad HQ, just north of Tel Aviv, which was its big symbolic response to that assassination, didn't strike their targets. Some landed and caused damage. Some were intercepted in the air, but the main thrust was intercepted on the ground or near the ground in Lebanon before it had a chance to do any damage. So Hezbollah, is on the back foot right here. They've suffered two very grievous blows and not been able to do much by way of retaliation. Will they try something different this time? That's the big question. Or will they just, what they've been doing so far with some success is to firing short-range missiles into northern Israel, which has been depopulated. The civilian population has been pretty much all moved away from the border area. And that's a psychological blow to Israel that Hezbollah haven't been able to inflict. They can't go back. It's not safe for them to go back to the border areas. So but that's what they've been doing anyway. So if they want to show something different, they have to target a high-ranking Israeli official or a high-ranking Israeli target like Mossad headquarters. But they haven't been able to do that. They haven't got. They so far they've not been able to land a really meaty blow on Israel. So, and they don't want to be humiliated again. So they don't want to have to have another humiliation like that. So that's the big question from the Hezbollah side. Can they actually inflict damage? On the other side, what is Israel doing itself? Is this part of a attempt to broaden the ground war into Lebanon, from Gaza into Lebanon? They say that they cannot return the 85,000 people to be moved from the border areas, not only because they're being targeted by Hezbollah missiles, but also because of the risk of what happened in Gaza on October the 7th happening in northern Israel. That you could do a peace deal with Hezbollah, everything could go back to normal, end of the war in Gaza, stability on the northern border. But will those people be safe there if Hezbollah were to mount an operation like Hamas did in Gaza? So Israel says that it wants to move Hezbollah back from the border area. UN resolutions that Israel cites say that Hezbollah should be disarmed. That's not going to happen. Everyone knows that's not going to happen, but they are pressing for Hezbollah, under the terms of another UN resolution, for Hezbollah to be moved back north of the Litani River in southern Lebanon. And that's what they say they are. They have plans in place to do that militarily if necessary. Is this part of that operation? Now, my view is probably not, but other people say yes. This is the precursor to that ground invasion. So that's the big question that we're really waiting to see now.
That that sense that you've got there of Lebanon being, really concerned about being humiliated again. I'm wondering how acutely that feeling will be in Iran, and therefore how much more involved they may be tempted to become, given that worry.
So the role of Iran is interesting. What again this attack showed is how closely Iran is involved in the operations of Hezbollah. One of the people injured, who's apparently lost his eye, is the Iranian ambassador. He had one of these pages. Why would the Iranian ambassador have a Hezbollah pager? Because Hezbollah and Iran are intimately connected. Hezbollah is not is more than a militia like Hamas. Hamas is a militia that is funded and backed by Iran, has been for many years, but the relationship goes up and down. Hezbollah is a different entity. Iran was closely involved in its creation and its building. It is closely involved in its decision making. Its leader Hassan Nasrallah is a very close, trusted aide of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Hezbollah has this almost triple face, if you like. It's a political operation in a political organization inside the Lebanese political establishment. It's a Lebanon-based militia, internal militia that could, if necessary, take part in any civil war in Lebanon. Sorry, and it is also part of the Iranian external apparatus. And operates as such. We saw that in Syria when it was fighting on the Iranian and Syrian side in Syria. So Iran is closely involved, and with that, the advantage of Hezbollah is that for Iran is that it can act on Iran's behalf against Israel without it being a state-to-state conflict, which Iran wants to avoid, because a state-to-state conflict would presumably bring in America on the side of Israel against Iran, and Iran couldn't sustain that. So the assumption is on most sides is that Iran doesn't want this to escalate into a regional war where it's facing an actual armed conflict between itself and Israel and possibly America as well. So that's why it uses Hezbollah, but that's why it also wants to ensure that Hezbollah doesn't react in such a way that effectively brings Iran into direct conflict with Israel.
So, I mean, you're talking there about, perhaps there isn't a desire really to escalate this too much more. But there's a bit of me wondering, if all of what's happened over the course of the last 2 days isn't, the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, in terms of, all-out regional war, I'm wondering what might be.
Well, something very different, actually. I mean, I'd say one possibility is, as I say, we there's this knee-jerk approach that everything bad that happens will lead to escalation. Often the case, no doubt about that. But there's also the argument that sometimes when you're losing a war, you need to step back, and that's a sensible thing to do. Hezbollah's wasn't involved in October the 7th. It didn't plan it. It may have known about it, but possibly not. It has no advantage in getting involved in a full frontal war with Israel at this stage for a whole host of reasons. It is doing so because it kind of would lose face if it doesn't, and it's part of the axis of resistance, as they call themselves, against Israel, and Iran wants it to play this intermediary role. But as it was put by a couple of people, it could be that Israel did this instead of a ground invasion. This humiliation that Hezbollah has suffered might lead it to say, well, we will do a deal. We will, find some face-saving way of stopping this confrontation. Not now. It clearly will carry on doing what it's doing until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. But if, as part of a ceasefire in Gaza, there was some face-saving deal to be done on the northern border that allowed Israel to move troops back on, to move its not troops, move its civilians back up north, which Israel is demanding, while preserving Hezbollah's role inside Lebanon to fight again another day. Who knows? Maybe that's what Israel is thinking. I mean, I don't know whether it's a successful strategy by Israel, but that might be what it's thinking. So the the idea that action leads to escalation, hasn't been the case. As say, both in terms of Israel's killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the killing of Fuad Shukr, the attack by the Israeli, those airstrikes a few months ago, which killed a couple of Iranian generals in the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Again, there was a big sort of missile retaliation from Iran, but it was all carefully signaled and choreographed. So all those missiles were taken out by Israel, America, and its allies in the region before they caused much damage. So the idea that this must lead to a massive escalation is not necessarily fixed. It's so unusual and so unexpected and so unprecedented in its nature that I think it's hard actually to just say X causes Y in this case, because we've never seen an X like this, so we don't know what the Y that follows on could be. And and to some extent, there's not much point in speculating what's going on in the minds of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, his Iranian allies, and indeed Netanyahu and his war cabinet at the moment. Netanyahu's war cabinet is also split on the issue of whether an invasion of Lebanon would be a good thing. So dangerous to make guesses unless you want to look silly.
And because of that unprecedented nature, I would imagine that there has been a lot of discussion about how to respond to this beyond them just denying that they knew what was happening in the US in particular.
The US has cooperated in some of these operations in the past. I mean, they say they didn't know about this one, and I can believe them. It's possible that Israel could have set up this, however it was done. It seems to have been they set up front companies, arranged the manufacture of these pages and devices. That has a very Mossad look about it. America's often quite careful how it words these things when it says, it wasn't involved. May have known about it, may have become aware of it. But the CIA, kind of like this sort of stuff, right? They prefer these operations to, full on war, because that looks bad for America. It drags them in. I don't think, there's no sign of them getting dragged in on this occasion. And I say they've done similar things in the past when the Iranian nuclear program was very badly damaged in 2010 by a computer virus called Stuxnet, which was infiltrated by Israel into the computer systems that ran the nuclear enrichment program and sort of kind of blew it up. That was also a CIA-assisted operation. It was later revealed. I mean, it had the hallmarks of Mossad, but apparently in the planning of that, the CIA were also involved. So, I think America will be looking very closely at the reaction. But sure as hell, they'd much rather see this than a Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon.
Plausible deniability, I think, is the phrase, isn't it? Just finally, we've obviously had a new development this morning, which is Israel saying that they have foiled an assassination plot that they believe is by Iran, recruited an Israeli apparently, who they have arrested, on Benjamin Netanyahu. I wonder whether the timing of that is in any way relevant to everything that's going on, and also how far a plot like that might go in. Well, politically, he's not in an easy situation, Benjamin Netanyahu, and I don't want to be cynical, but even if this did happen, completely legitimately, as Israel is saying it did, it's a useful time to be releasing the news.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's such a fascinating story, this one. I mean, again, to fill in the details, I mean, they sound incredibly far-fetched until you realize how much of what's happened, like with the pages, it would be very far-fetched if you outlined them in a spy thriller. According to this Israeli businessman was offered the chance of doing some backroom deals with an Iranian businessman. They met in a town in Turkey near the Iranian border. He was smuggled in to meet this business contact, this Israeli businessman, and he the relations were maintained, and eventually he was introduced to Iranian agents who offered him money to use his access to Israel to help set up a plot to assassinate Netanyahu. Didn't get very far. He said he wasn't going to do it because they weren't offering him enough money, and they, according to the reports in the Israeli press at the moment. As I say, slightly far-fetched, but the important thing here for Israel, I mean, the reason why this has been released now, these details, is that again, it shows a certain helplessness on the part of the Iranian axis. That, I mean, it was a kind of slightly bonkers plot and slightly far-fetched and slightly unrealistic. The idea that just a random Israeli businessman could leave pots of money dotted around Israel for other agents to fund their assassination attempts on Netanyahu. There are parallels with plots of Iran is being accused of trying to kill targets in America. But it's not entirely unbelievable. Iran does have a foreign assassination program. We're pretty sure, for example, that it's worked, that Iran, either directly or via Hezbollah, but most probably directly through its agents and consulates abroad, has worked with criminal gangs in the Netherlands, for example, drugs gangs with who they've kind of hired their hitmen for hire, if you like, and used them to kill Iranian dissidents in the last few years. Some pretty remarkable details have come out in some of the big drugs trials that have been going on in Netherlands in the last couple of years. If you followed that, of the sideline that some of these drugs gangs have in their relations with Iran, including visits to Iran and deals conducted in Dubai for targeted assassinations of Iranian targets. So it's not unbelievable what this what Israel are trying to do here, though, is to show that that Iran is kind of desperate in how they are going to retaliate. As I said, the standard methods of retaliation for some of these actions that Israel have taken out against Iran and Hezbollah in the last few months, the lack of ability to lay a finger on Israel in return. I said they'll be thinking very hard how to reply to this latest pager attack, and I think this is Israel saying, they can't do much because look, even when they try, it's a bit of a fiasco.